Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Rishi Sunak is the first person of foreign origin to be UK Prime Minister. He's a Hindu and he's never hidden his faith. He goes to temples, celebrates Diwali, and these are visuals that are a common thing for us now, over 22 months. But now, opposition Labour Party Prime Minister candidate Keir Starmer has been seen visiting the Swaminarayan temple, and he's promised to protect Hindus. Now, while most polls forecast a Labour landslide, the interesting thing is that this is possibly the first time that both the Labour and Conservatives are wooing the Indian vote bank. But why is this vote bank important on the UK's 4th of July polls? Joining me to discuss this are Dr. Neeraj Patil, Chairman of Hindus for Labour, Ambassador Y.K. Sinha, former High Commissioner to the UK, and my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul here in the studio with me. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Ambassador Sinha, I want to start by asking you this. When is the last time you saw Labour and Conservatives agreeing on something as important as wooing the Indian vote bank?
You know, though the Indian diaspora is 3.1%, last I recall, of the total population, 1.86 million, and a very important swing factor in elections, particularly recently. But I think there has been a concerted effort by both parties to woo the Indian vote. And that's very interesting. You mentioned about visiting temples. I recall that candidates, even non-Indian origin candidates, visited Indian temples in the past, wooing the diaspora vote, but also I think celebrating important Indian festivals. I recall going to 10 Downing Street to celebrate Diwali when Theresa May was the Prime Minister, and I think that tradition has continued. So I think the importance of the Indian diaspora vote is clearly underlined by not only the leadership of the main parties in the UK, but also the number of candidates that they are putting up from the diaspora.
Right, absolutely. Aditya, you've seen those visuals of both the Prime Minister and the Shadow Prime Minister going out to temples and telling voters that they are the best bet for the Indian community there. But there's also a lot of worry for us that you have a very strong Khalistan segment there that have been protesting against the High Commission there, attacking our property there, threatening our diplomats. Do you think one can balance the other?
One thing is very clear, that things are changing on ground. Earlier, there was a perception that only the Conservatives, the Tories, are in favor of India. But this time around, it seems that there's a bipartisan support. It seems that the Labours are also trying to realize that there are some gaps that need to be filled, especially in the last 5 to 6 years. There's been a growing realization.
Right.
Of course, it's amply clear now that the Labour is certainly going to come to power. They're perhaps going to get 99% more votes. That's what the pollsters are saying than what Tony Blair really got in 1997. That means they had 418 seats out of the 650, and this time around it will go up to 484, perhaps, if the pollsters are going to be believed. But you raised a very important and critical point, and that is about the separatist tendency and anti-India plank that's very much active in the United Kingdom. Sandeep, what has also happened over the last few days is that Keir Starmer has assured the Indian community, the Asian community, that they have taken steps against the leaders in the Labour Party having extremist views. That includes Jeremy Corbyn, that includes many others in the list. You would remember that in 2019, when India nullified Article 370, there was a resolution that the Labour came up with at the behest of Jeremy Corbyn that clearly indicated that there needs to be international intervention in an internal issue of India, that is Jammu and Kashmir. Since then, there's been bipartisan support from a lot of Labour and Conservative leaders inside the House of Commons that this is an internal issue of India. We need to be more concerned about Pakistan-sponsored terrorism and attack against the minorities. While there's been an assurance from Keir Starmer and Annalisa Dodd as well, that clearly indicated at a recent British Asian event that they are taking steps against them. A lot needs to be seen on ground as well. That will they act against the Khalistani elements, a lot of designated terrorists who stay in UK, who actively campaign outside the Indian High Commission and attack the Indian High Commission property. And apart from that, also, top of the agenda this time on both for Labour as well as the Conservatives is the FTA.
Right.
And they want to woo India, they want to keep India in their good books, and that is something very critical, not just for the Conservatives,
Yes.
but for the Labour also.
But for
this
Labour
time.
as well. No, very important points there, Aditya, that you've raised. The fact that, Labour is a nightmare for India as far as the kind of backing that some of their leaders have given to separatists. And of course, I'm not going back to the 90s when they said they would mediate between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. But Dr. Neeraj Patil now joins us from the UK. Dr. Patil, welcome to the News9 Plus show. I want to, ask you this, the points that you heard what Aditya mentioned, the fact that we have some very bad memories of Labour. Every time Labour comes into power or is, around somewhere, close to power, you have something like this happening. You have leaders within the Labour Party who are very vocal, backing separatist elements, Khalistanis, Kashmiris, all of these things which don't go down well with the government of India. What do you think has changed in the last 4 or 5 years for Labour to now come out in favour of the Indian community in the UK and also, take a pro-India stance, if I can put it that way?
The Labour Party, we are a socialist party, and we have certain idols and certain principles which we don't compromise. Be it Britain, be it India, be it US, be it Pakistan, be it any country, right? Things like freedom of speech, democracy, human rights, okay, respect for law. So these things, and also an individual's ability to participate and progress in a democratic structure. So all these things, they are very, very, essential things on which the Labour Party does not compromise. And at no stage, let me make it very, very, very clear to you. I've been member of the Labour Party for the last 30 years. Labour Party has never, ever been anti-India.
But, Dr. Patil, I'm talking about the elements within the Labour Party, very influential leaders who have spoken out in favour of certain separatist elements.
See, again, you have members of parliament who speak in favor of India. You have member of parliament that speak in favor of anti-India countries.
Right.
Now, that is their freedom of speech and their prerogative.
Right.
Now, end of the day, you must judge by what decision a government takes. Tell me one decision that a Labour government has taken that is anti-India. I challenge everyone. There's not a single decision that has been taken by a Labour government which is anti-India. There may be some MPs who have soft corner for Pakistan. There are some MPs who have soft corner for India. There are MPs who have concerns about human right violation in Punjab. So the thing is, officially, let me make it very clear to your viewers that Labour Party has never ever taken a anti-India stand. Labour Party, I mean to say, is a Labour government. The only thing which comes to people's mind is, I'll tell you, on 24th September 2019 at the Labour Party conference, I'm telling you, it is
Yes.
only a party conference. At a party conference, a motion was passed, and that motion was, yes, it was it was not in favor of India, but that motion never went any forward. That motion was not adopted by the Parliamentary Labour Party. That motion never took, life. So, but yes, again, the perception builds up.
Yes.
There is a media hype, and then people get. These days people believe more in social media
Yes.
than in the frontline media.
But let's ask Ambassador Sinha this question. Ambassador Sinha, you think Labour's got a bad rep as far as this is concerned? The fact that Labour is not so friendly to Indian interests, and do you believe that things have changed now in the last 5 years when it comes to Indian interests, given the fact that you have Kashmiri separatists who are believed to be operating out of the UK, you have Khalistani elements there who, as Aditya mentioned, have been attacking the Indian High Commission there in London. Have things changed now in the last 4 or 5 years that Labour, the new Labour government that we believe is going to take office after the 4th of July, is going to be very different from the Labour governments of the past?
I think the proof of the pudding is in its eating. While Dr. Patil has been, is correct that, I mean, as far as policies go, as far as Labour hasn't been in government for 14 years, so they
Yes.
have not been able, they haven't sort of, there's no government policy as such that has been anti-India from their part. But their pronouncements, certainly he mentioned the resolution of 2019, which we in India perceive as a direct interference in our internal affairs. And there have been statements by the leadership at various levels which have not been received well in India. And it's not just social media, it is also perception gained from what is stated publicly and as reported. So I think we need to be careful here. We obviously cannot condemn any party, certainly not, that is not the intention. And I think the Labour has moved far to the centre now than it was earlier under the previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn. And I remember during Jeremy Corbyn's time, there was a coterie of MPs from the Midlands, Bradford, etc., who determined Labour's policy towards South Asia. We found that quite visible in the pronouncements. But Sir Keir Starmer has actually moved the party to centre. He has reached out to the, not just to the Indian diaspora, but to the Indian government. I remember the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy reaching out. Recently, he made a speech. These are very encouraging signs. And I think people like Dr. Patil and other old-timer politicians of Indian origin who are in the Labour Party will help, obviously, in moderating their positions, or at least ensuring that they take fair positions. Dr. Patil mentioned human rights in Punjab. I don't want to respond to that directly because I have now retired from the government. But I could certainly pick out human rights issues regarding women in the Midlands or in Bradford or some other place, but I won't. But I'm just trying to say that every country, democracy, even the best of democracies, have certain shortcomings, and I think all of us try and address those issues. But finger pointing, and particularly misplaced finger pointing, causes unnecessary bad blood and then vitiates the relationship. But I am sanguine that with this Labour coming to power, there will be this emphasis on commonality of interests. You mentioned FTA. The FTA is very important. We've heard statements for the Labour leadership that they want to continue with the FTA, which is mutually beneficial. And I think we have travelled quite a distance as far as negotiations on the FTA are concerned. And I do hope that with the new government in the saddle in the UK, we will be able to pursue that line and come up with a mutually beneficial FTA, which will emphasize the complementarities of both the economies and be beneficial to both.
Absolutely. In fact, there's the free trade agreement with the UK, Aditya, has been in the pipeline for a long time. In fact, David Lammy, who's expected to take over as Foreign Secretary, has spoken about this trade deal, and he said it's something that the Conservatives couldn't do. And interesting choice of phrase that he used, that many Diwalis have come and gone, but we've not seen a free trade deal. How significant is this for India-UK relations, given the fact that we trade, we export over $50 billion worth of goods and services to the UK?
Well, I'll tell you how important this is. This is important because of the mere fact that, you know, our exports from the UK are 6 times more than that we have from Russia. These negotiations have been on for quite some time, but I personally believe that there's been some course correction that the Labour has done. And if there is further movement that happens in the next few months, there could be actually a possibility. There is, of course, a very tough negotiation that is happening, both from New Delhi, because New Delhi is not planning to surrender any moment. So a mutually beneficial FTA certainly would be something that they would consider. But I want to comment also on what Mr. Patil mentioned about human rights. You know, while he was talking about human rights in Punjab, I just received a message on my phone, and that is that Amritpal Singh, the separatist who is in Dibrugarh jail in Assam, and a known separatist, a self-confessed separatist, has been granted bail for a day to actually enter the parliament and take oath. And this signifies the kind of human rights, dignity, and freedom of expression that New Delhi really gives to the people, that even separatists are contesting elections democratically, winning. I don't think that there is any kind of a replica or something similar that's happening in the UK. And I think there's a growing realization that the UK Labour needs to understand is that if a banned designated organization was in India, claiming that UK, parts of UK need freedom, how would UK really react to that?
Absolutely.
So I think there needs to be a growing realization that to give a safe shelter and a sanctuary to terror groups, to radicals, is not a sustainable model in the long run.
Not a sustainable model indeed. But before I leave, I want to ask Dr. Patil this thing about how Labour sees its fortunes tomorrow on the 4th of July elections. By tomorrow evening, we'll know whether it's going to be ab ki baar 300 par, as is being predicted for Labour. It's been a while, Dr. Patil. Labour's been out of office for 14 years. That's a long time. It's almost 3 consecutive terms. But how do you think this Labour is going to be different from the previous Labour of Jeremy Corbyn? A short answer.
I want to say one thing on the human rights, and then I will come back to your question. I'm not accusing India of human right violation. I'm not accusing any country of human right violation. I'm making a general statement that, in Britain, we raise human right violation that happens in any part of the world, any part of the globe. That's the first thing. And there have been human right violations in all parts of the globe. And as global citizens, we must condemn human right violation wherever it happens. That's the principle. And on the issue of referendum, we had referendums in the UK, and people are allowed to ask for a referendum. Say, for example, tomorrow I can have a referendum in England saying that I want a separate country for Karnataka. So it's not considered as violation of law in the UK. It may be different in India, but it's not so in
Absolutely.
the UK. That's
very different, but where we agree on, it comes to the India factor in the UK elections. Thank you very much for joining us this evening,
and
Dr.
also,
Patil.
sorry,
I'm completely out of time, Dr. Patil. We'll have to continue this discussion another day, but thanks very much for joining us this evening. Ambassador Yash Sinha and my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul. The UK elections, the India factor. For the first time, both Conservatives and Labour agreeing on something. Let's go over to News9's Kabir Naqvi, who's on the ground covering the UK elections. Kabir, you've just covered the Indian elections and now you're in the UK. How's the weather and what's the mood like there? Are people really excited about the elections?
Well, absolutely. Sandeep, we saw that, conducting elections for 140 crore people is not a small task. It's a mammoth of a task. But here in Birmingham, which is essentially crowded by the overseas population, the immigration population is quite high. It's dominated by the Pakistan community. You've got a lot of Indians living here as well. But not just these two places. From all walks of life, across the world, people come here to be students. The tertiary sector is quite rightly depending on the immigrants over here. Talking about the voter apathy, well, it's quite rightly out in the open. People don't really care much about the elections. And like all around me that you can see, it's usually grim. The skies are grey, it's raining. The weather is inclement almost throughout the year. But you see no hoarding of political, figures. You see no hoarding of advertisements, sort of endorsing their very respective candidates. Nothing of that sort. And I've been speaking to people on the ground, especially the Britishers here. They seem to care less about the elections. Now, I'm not sure if that's the situation all across the country, but here in Birmingham, it's more about Jude Bellingham's overhead kick and Andy Murray not playing singles and only the men's doubles at the Wimbledon. That's all they care about at this point in time. It's a student community. During the evening, the clubs and the pubs, they start getting filled up. People start thronging these clubs because the Euro competitions are on. England is supposed to play, Switzerland in the round of in the quarterfinals. Beg your pardon. At this point in time, nobody is worried about the political scenario, but at the same time, Sandeep, the problems on the ground are so much, they're so deep and intrinsic. The housing crisis, the homelessness. I mean, you can't walk around for 5 minutes without somebody coming and asking you for money. That's the situation at this point in time. And look at the weather. It's so cold. How are people dealing with that kind of situation? One has to take a look at. All the students that I'm talking to as well, they've come here to find better careers for themselves, to make a better life for themselves, but they're not too sure whether after the change of government they're going to be planning to stay here, or whether after they complete their respective graduation courses they will end up getting a job here or not. That's something that one has to take a look at. I'm going to be traveling to London soon. We'll have to see if the situation over there is a little different, but over here people don't really care about the elections as much, at least in Birmingham. Sandeep.
Britishers not so kicked about polling day. That's a surprise. Kabir, the election opinion polls are forecasting a Labour landslide. Ab ki baar 300 par for Labour. But could there be a surprise like in our opinion polls and exit polls in India last month?
Sandeep, you put me in a tricky spot over here. Of course, I mean, the exit polls, they're just a sample survey. It's not the true picture, never has been, and not once, but a myriad of times have we seen that, the exit polls come up a little bit of a dud and a damn squib. What's going to happen here? Well, we'll have to wait and find out. Unlike back at home, it doesn't take a lot for the counting process to get over. We're going to get the results very soon. And Nigel Farage, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, or Boris Johnson in that new bonhomie between these two. We'll have to wait and find out as to what happens, Sandeep.
And finally, can Nigel Farage of the far-right Reform UK play the spoiler in these elections?
Well, Sandeep, Nigel Farage playing a spoil sport, I don't know if that's the right adjective to use. We'll have to see that how crucial a role is he going to be playing, because let's not forget, all headlines, all tabloids, all portals that you'll open up and put UK polls right now, you'll have one or the other story about Nigel Farage. My favorite one, of course, being that the activists led by donkeys put up that banner that came down during his, one of his public gathering speeches. And on that particular banner was a photograph of Putin and said, "I love Nigel." Racism, those racist slurs, it seems like apart from politics, the banter amongst these political leaders, it's ongoing. But I've been speaking to a couple of Indians, specifically Indians from the Uber taxi driving community. They're saying that they're going to be voting Reform this time around. So Reform Party is going to be cutting down on votes, primarily conservative votes, but in many places it's also going to be cutting down on some Labour votes as well. We'll have to wait and find out as to what kind of vote share does Nigel Farage, gather up. Let's not forget, he's a Thatcher-era politician. He certainly knows what he's up to.
Thanks, Kabir. We'll keep coming back to you for news and updates as we count down to the exciting UK elections. Airplane maker Boeing is in the middle of a crisis. In January, a door blew out of one of its planes mid-flight. Now, earlier in 2018 and 19, two 737 MAX crashes killed 346 people. Now, there have been two Senate hearings in the US. There are court cases piling up. And now you have the Boeing Starliner that's left astronauts Sunita Williams and Butch Wilmore stranded in space on board the International Space Station because of faulty parts in a spacecraft made by Boeing. So what's plaguing Boeing? To talk about this, I have with me aviation consultant Mark Martin, and in the studio with me is my colleague Karthik Malhotra. Karthik, how closely do you look at an aircraft these days before you fly?
I'm very, very jittery now, Sandeep, I kid you not. And I think, the jitteriness has come more out of the turbulence news that we've seen, not as much, as a journalist that we don't have 737 MAX fleets operating in India. So, at least there is some safety already in place. But it's not a good feeling.
It's not a good feeling at all. And one wonders what's going through Sunita Williams' mind right now as she's stranded in space. First it was 45 days, then it went on to 90 days, and now there's no new date. But let's ask Mark Martin this question. Mark, what happened to Boeing?
Hi, Sandeep. Thanks so much for having me, and good to be on TV9. I think what's really gotten wrong with Boeing is that we've seen the writing on the wall since 2007 and 8. Boeing just stopped innovating.
Yes.
They used the same old drawing, the old design of the 737, which dates back to the 1960s.
Yes.
And you just continuously try to improve it and tinker it and fiddle around with it. And what you have now is what I call foie gras technology, where you're forced on a technology on a primitive design with the hope and chance that it's going to sell a lot over in India or in other parts of the world and compete with Airbus. Now, I know what Karthik mentioned, but guess what? Akasa Air and Air India Express currently operate the 737 MAX in India.
Yes.
So we have a fleet of close to about 47 to 50, and Akasa is going to be adding 150 more 737 Maxes for at least the India fleet. So the worry I have is, as Karthik rightly said, what's in those aircraft? What are they? What's installed in it, and what's going to break tomorrow? Because the bigger challenge with Boeing is that it's extremely unpredictable, it's volatile, and we have no idea how the aircraft is going to react. And all of it, Sandeep, the buck stops with Boeing. It's $100 million airplane. These aircraft don't come cheap. And, Boeing has, while they maintain the final assembly line over in Seattle, they have every responsibility to ensure that what they send out of the plant or the factory is an aircraft that is safe to fly. And all that we've been seeing with Boeing is, absolutely on the contrary. How can you not audit your suppliers for quality, and how can you not reject a part when it comes to your facility as final assembly?
Right.
So it's very clear that Boeing is, pretty much run by a bunch of bean counters. It's
Right.
all about the money. It's all about the earnings per share. All of it has been said by the U.S. Senate in the Senate hearings twice.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And in fact, the Senate
yeah.
hearings were brutal on the Boeing executives, Karthik. They literally had a roast of the Boeing top CEOs. But, what's the lesson here for companies? What's the larger lesson? That's the point that Mark mentioned, is that they stopped innovating. I think they got too complacent and they started just stretching out their old designs for as long as they could, 40, 50 years. And today you have a situation where, the company, as Mark again mentioned, is that it's been run by bean counters and not by the technology guys who actually built Boeing.
You're right. So, I think fundamentally the problem is when it is not an aviation enthusiast who's running a company,
Yes.
but somebody who specializes in management and is more of a generalist,
Yes.
then you are unable to pick on these very, very small but very essential components that
Yes.
go into every part of the aircraft. Now, why lack of innovation could be lesson number one, I believe there are multiple lessons to be learned here. For example, the 2018-2019 crashes,
Yes.
which stemmed out of the MCAS innovation,
Yes.
literally. The problem was that the rule books weren't written very clearly, and the fact that pilots could or could not override the MCAS in which situation
Yes.
is not something that Boeing invested enough in training pilots on.
Yes.
Whereas what we saw in the case of this door plug blowing out on the 5th
Yes.
of Jan this year stems from poor design, stems from perhaps not enough checks and balances at the factory end,
Right.
and your relationships with the suppliers. Now, what Boeing has done more recently is that you are going ahead and you are purchasing Spirit Aerospace, which is one of your suppliers. And is that is backward integration the right way to fix this? I mean, how many companies are you going to integrate with backwardly?
Right.
So the point is, there's not one lesson to be learned. There are multiple lessons, but lesson number one is an aviation company needs to be run by an aviation enthusiast, somebody who
Yes.
understands the engineering. And
Absolutely.
I think which is where Elon Musk scores well, because he understands his engineering, he
Yes.
understands what goes into the ship, and he
Absolutely.
understands what goes into the electric vehicle, and hence, even to rescue Sunita Williams and the other astronaut from
Yes.
outer space, it's likely that there is going to be a Tesla vehicle which is going to rescue them, and perhaps not another Boeing jet being sent up
Absolutely
in the sky.
not. And that's the thing about space technology. I mean, Mark, this thing that space, the tolerances are practically zero. You just can't take a risk, you can't take a chance. And we've grown up seeing those catastrophic accidents in space with, a previous astronaut of Indian origin. We remember Kalpana Chawla very closely, and I think a lot of us had that feeling when these new revelations came out about the Boeing spacecraft that was to bring Sunita Williams back. But what has Boeing been doing, Mark, since you track the sector so closely? What has Boeing been doing for course correction to kind of repair many of these things, or you think that that ship has already sailed? It's too late in the day now for them to do anything about it?
what Boeing is doing right now, or what they've done in the last 5 years after the 2018-19 crash and Starliner being completely disabled in the ISS, is, Boeing has always been about cover up, because even what happened on the 77 MAX, they installed an MCAS, as Karthik rightly said, but you never told the pilots you had something called an MCAS over there. There were no procedures, there was no SOP to follow. So pilots just flew, and unknowingly the aircraft went into a nose down position. It was only much later on that they started to train pilots and rewrite the regulations and rewrite the procedures on the the inserts in the manual. The concern I have is that even the bigger concern I have is with them buying Spirit Aero systems. Now, clearly, Boeing is aware of far more dirt that is going on in Spirit Aerosystems, because the more you dig into the Spirit Aerosystems way of working, the more garbage you're going to find. So the best way to kill that is, just buy them out, and now they're Boeing. Now none of that information can get out of the public. Let's not forget, all the whistleblowers in the past have been from Spirit Aerosystems. They're the ones who've been coming up and saying, things are going wrong. Now, it's, one is you've got a door blowing out, which is the most ridiculous thing in a brand new aircraft. Usually you see those kind of incidents, Sandeep and Karthik, in a 30-year-old aircraft or a 40-year-old aircraft. We talked about aging aircraft and, oh no, we shouldn't fly a 30-year-old aircraft. DGCA says we can only bring an aircraft which is 15 years old. Well, guess what? Today, with what's coming out of Boeing, a Boeing made 30 years ago is 10 times more reliable than a 737 MAX in the market today.
You read my thoughts there, Mark.
I'll just add one more thing, Sandeep. One more thing on the Starliner. It's the fourth failed launch.
Yes.
This launch, when Sonny Williams and Butch went over to ISS, they had failures throughout. The docking procedure. It's when she entered ISS is when she said, "I'm not going back because it's a total failure."
Yes.
And this purely points down to exactly what Boeing did with the MAX. They never told them what the real problems were. They just passed the buck and said, we'll see what happens. Endangered a space mission. So yes, Sandeep, you were saying.
Yes, no, Mark, while you were talking about how the old Boeings are so reliable, I was just instantly reminded of this aircraft that flown by Indian Air Force pilots, but it's not an Air Force plane. A 707 that's operated by the ARC, that's 56 years old, believe it or not. Bought in the year 1968, it's still flying and as good as new. I've seen it on a couple of occasions. So, that thought jumped out at me right in the form of that plane, that you have a Boeing aircraft over half a century old that's still flying in mint condition.
Absolutely.
And it's been upgraded.
In fact,
so that points to where the,
the Boeing 707 came from the Air India,
which
was inducted in 1965, and the Air Force still flies it. It's still reliable. The Boeing 737-200 that was with Indian Airlines, and which was our official Comm Squadron presidential flight in the Air Force, they were flying that 737-200 for a very long time. That aircraft still flies; it never breaks, And I've maintained and operated Boeing aircraft, at least the NG, and I can tell you, we swore by Boeing, and that's the worry I have. Today, pilots, engineers, cabin crew, and what Karthik mentioned initially, even passengers. I know passengers who actually, ask their kids, "Beta, aap Max mein fly mat karo, fly any other aircraft except the Max." So this is the reputation and credibility Boeing has brought itself to. And to get out of this, honestly, Sandeep, Karthik, it's not going to take, there's no magic wand by buying Spirit Aerosystems or you'll turn it around. It's going to take Boeing a long time to win back the credibility of Boeing, win back the confidence of everybody, because Boeing's technology today that works is not Boeing. It is when Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas, the F-15 Eagle, the F-18 Super Hornet, the AV-8B Harrier, all these aircraft were actually McDonnell Douglas aircraft. Even the C-17 Globemaster III is a McDonnell Douglas designed aircraft. It's not a Boeing aircraft. And and that's the worry today. McDonnell Douglas aircraft are 100 times more reliable than anything that comes out of a Boeing, a design drawing board. And that's really scary.
Right, that's really scary. But that's an interesting story there, Karthik. And because I cover the military and especially military aviation, I know the fact that all of those aircraft were actually all McDonnell Douglas, and the fact that Boeing, which was a commercial aircraft maker, suddenly overnight transformed into a defense aircraft manufacturer.
So, Sandeep, do you think there's a case now for a reverse sort of accusation to happen? Because if not Boeing, what are the options you've got? You've only got Airbus. So is it time for another third player to emerge from somewhere and perhaps pick up Boeing, and then look at a turnaround story? Because in the absence of that, in the absence of that, you don't really seem to find a solution, because heads could roll.
Yes.
Heads will pretty much roll. In any case, Dave Calhoun is set to retire end of this year. He's drawing a fat salary of $25 million per year. He's going to get a golden parachute of $45 million on retirement. What happens with his retirement?
Right.
I mean, where does the buck stop? What is the final conclusion of all that we have seen going wrong in Boeing and the lives that have been lost, and this sort of laxity in the attitude of executives at Boeing? All this has to end somewhere.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the cover-up, as Mark mentioned.
The cover-up, absolutely.
That Boeing has been on a covering-up spree, and they're being called out, they're being caught out. But the fact is that what you mentioned, Karthik, possibly Elon Musk, what do you think? Could interest him to buy Boeing out like he did Twitter? Maybe
you never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
Boeing is the ultimate toy for someone like a billionaire like Elon Musk.
I'd love to see electric commercial fleet flying in the sky, just
that
like
could be the future. But that's a story that's not going away very quickly, because we're watching with our fingers crossed what happens to Sunita Williams and her colleague as they are stranded in space. It looks like for a very long time now, at least 2 or 3 months. And who knows, it could be Elon Musk riding into the rescue in a Tesla-built spacecraft. Possibly the guy who could bail out Boeing as well. But thank you very much for joining us this evening, Mark Martin and my colleague, Karthik Malhotra.